These now give rise to the motivation of bodhicitta, the thought, I will establish all mother beings, limitless in number, as the vast reaches of space at the level of perfect all-knowing enlightenment. To that end, I will listen to this profound Dharma teaching and put it into practice accordingly. What Dharma teaching are we looking at today? We're looking at the root verses of the 6 Bardos, these root verses being found in Karma Lingpa's instructions on the 6 Bardos. We've already covered 4 of the 6 Bardos, the Bardo of living, the Bardo of dream, the Bardo of samadhi or meditation, and the Bardo of dying, these 4. So today we will begin to look at the Bardo of dharmata, and I will explain this in a bit more detail. So yesterday, when going through the Bardo of dream and the Bardo of samadhi, we just discussed those briefly. But to recap, these 2 Bardos of dream and samadhi concern our practice. They describe periods of practice. So the Bardo of dream describes how we practice at night when sleeping. Ideally, we sleep while merging our mind inseparably with luminosity, and we sleep in a state of luminosity. But failing that, at least we train during the night, we train during our sleep, so that we come to recognize that all phenomena, all appearances are just like dreams, just illusions, they lack reality. That is how we train at night. That is the Bardo of dream. And then we wake up from our sleep and we enter our waking life in the daytime. And how do we practice at this time? Well, that is what the Bardo of samadhi describes. In the Bardo of samadhi during our waking life, then, well, from the perspective of the great perfection, we train then in Trekja and Tögal, cutting through and direct crossing, and thereby train in sustaining Rigpa, sustaining the recognition of Rigpa throughout the day without cease. If we're unable to do that, well then we could also be training in the generation and completion stages. In short, we train throughout the day in practice. That is the Bardo of samadhi. And that is, we could say, the main part, the main body of our practice. So what are the contexts or the opportunities, the situations for the training that we do in the Bardo of dream and samadhi to be applied? Well, those are the other 4 Bardos. The Bardo of living, the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of dharmata, and the Bardo of becoming. These other 4 Bardos are the contexts in which we apply the training that we have accomplished in the Bardo of dream or samadhi, or we could simply say those are the contexts in which we apply those 2 Bardos of dream and samadhi. It's a bit like if you are training to be a soldier. Well, you go through a lot of training, right? In the military camp, then you do a lot of exercise and a lot of preparation and training, but all of that training is done so that when you arrive on the battlefield, when you're facing your enemy, you're able to perform right. Arriving on the battlefield is the context, the situation in which to apply everything you've trained. So likewise with the Bardo of dream and samadhi, the context, the situation for us to apply the trainings in those 2 Bardos are the other 4 Bardos. So if we train through the Bardo of dream and Bardo of samadhi in various practices, Trekja and Tögal, the practices of the great perfection, maybe we train in the practices of the subtle channels and winds, or the generation and completion stages, and we put a lot of effort and energy into training in these practices. But if we can't then apply those practices, apply that training to, say, the moment of death, to the process of dying, or to our waking life, to other situations, and so on, well then all of that training has gone to waste, right? It is not bearing fruit. A bit like if a soldier trains in the army camp extensively, but when they arrive on the battlefield, they're not able to perform, they don't apply what they've learned, well then their training is useless, right? So the whole point of training, or rather the training that we undergo in the Bardo of dream and samadhi is intended to be applied during the other 4 Bardos. In that way they will bear fruit. So we have these 6 Bardos, right? And earlier I was thinking, I would tell a story of 6 different masters. I would tell the stories of 6 different great masters to illustrate how one should practice and make use of each of these 6 different Bardos. But looking at our time constraint, I can see we're not going to have time to go through 6 different life stories. So I thought about this and I've decided to tell just the life story of the great master Longchenpa, and through the life story of Longchenpa, illustrate how it is that we should practice and apply the instructions of these 6 Bardos throughout the course of our lives. So Well, first of all, we have the bardo of living. How do we need to practice in the bardo of living? We need to apply the instruction of being like a sparrow without any hesitation. That's to say that we need to engage in study and reflection, thereby cut through all doubts and misunderstandings, and in that way reach the point where, just like a sparrow that is completely free of doubt and hesitation, we too become free of doubt and hesitation. In the bardo of dying, it is said we need the instruction of a young woman looking in the mirror one last time before going out. So, in short, we need the instruction of poa, the transference of consciousness. Then we have the bardo of dharmata. So, how to practice in the bardo of dharmata? Well, it's said that we need to apply the instruction of a child jumping into their mother's lap. So what does that mean? Well, in the bardo of dharmata, then basic luminosity, or we could say ground luminosity, arises. This ground luminosity is like a mother, analogous to a mother, and the path luminosity, meaning the luminosity that we have recognized, well, if we have practiced properly, if we have practiced well during this life, then through the course of our practice, we will have recognized through the Guru's pointing out instructions the nature of mind, and that we call the path luminosity, the nature of mind that we've recognized, the luminosity we've recognized in this life. Let's think of what happens when a child sees their mother in a marketplace, say they're in a crowd of many people, but when a young child of like 2 or 3 sees their mother, they recognize their mother straight away, right? And without any hesitation, they run over to their mother and just jump into their arms or jump onto their lap. So likewise, if we've trained well and have recognized path luminosity, then when we reach the bardo of dharmata and the mother luminosity, meaning ground luminosity, arises and manifests, we will recognize that instantly through the strength of our own training. And in that way, the mother luminosity and child luminosity will be united, just like a child leaping onto its mother's lap. Then we have the bardo of becoming. So fourth, we have the bardo of becoming. And what instruction do we need to apply in the bardo of becoming? Well, the instruction of laying a pipe in a broken gutter. So if you have a gutter, or we could say an irrigation channel in fields, either way, if that irrigation channel or gutter is broken, well, then the water that's meant to flow through it is not going to flow through it, right? It's going to spill out and it's going to end up flowing somewhere where it's not meant to go. If then you lay a pipe along this broken gutter or broken irrigation channel, well, that's going to keep the water flowing in the right direction, right? So it reaches its proper destination. So how does this relate to the bardo of becoming? Well, in the bardo of becoming, when the peaceful and wrathful deities manifest over the course of 49 days, the period of the bardo of becoming, then one applies certain practices, like the practices of the peaceful and wrathful deities and certain guidance rituals to help guide and liberate the deceased. These are of enormous importance and enormous benefit in the bardo of becoming. This will guide the bardo being to the correct destination, just like the pipe placed in the bottom of a broken gutter guides the water in the right direction. So I'll explain these 4 bardos with the liberating life story of the great master Longchenpa. So instead of using a separate life story of each bardo, I'll illustrate all 4 bardos through the life story of Longchenpa. Of course, we could use a separate life story for each bardo, and we could use very long and elaborate life stories. That would be very excellent, separate life stories to illustrate each bardo. But anyway, we don't have time to do that, so we'll just focus on the great master Longchenpa's life story. I don't know about other nationalities, but I do know that you Taiwanese love stories. Of course, there's good reason for that. Stories kind of wake us up, they keep engaged, they make the meaning of various things, various principles and so on more easy to understand. So there is very good reason to like stories and to use stories for teaching purposes. Let's look at the great treatise by Rongso Mahapandita, Entering the Way of the Great Vehicle. Well, in that treatise, Rongso Mahapandita explains all of his points from beginning to end with one analogy after another. Basically, he teaches with stories, and we can look at the words of my perfect teacher, Patrul Rinpoche's great text. That too is basically a story commentary. All of the principles in that text are taught through stories, so there is very good reason to like stories and to use stories in this way. And in short, that is the approach we're going to take today. So the life of our great master Longchenpa, well, I'm not going to go into all the details of exactly which year he was born in, what the names of his parents were, and so on. If I tell his life story in that kind of much detail, then we'll end up giving as much. Well, all of those details kind of can fill a whole book. So I'm not going to go into all of those details. In short, Longchenpa was born into a kind of average family in terms of wealth, let's say like average middle class family. His birth was accompanied by many miraculous signs and omens. You can read about those in his hagiographies. From the age of 13 or 14, then Longchenpa immersed himself in intense study of the scriptures. He went off to Samye in central Tibet to study and engaged in intense study for many years. At that time, all of the greatest scholars of Tibet were present in Samye. So this was a real center of learning. But through his studies and through his efforts, Longchenpa became the most learned of them all. He became the most celebrated scholar of his time at Samye, so much so that he became known as Samye Lungmangpa, meaning the well-versed one of Samye, the great scholar of Samye. Samye Lungmangwa was his name, or one of his nicknames. So we say that it's taught that in the Bardo of living, then one must embody the instruction of being like a sparrow without hesitation, meaning one should reach the point where one is free of doubt as a result of cutting. One should reach the point where one is free of doubt, having cut through all doubts and misunderstandings through study and reflection, and we can see this quality embodied in Longchenpa, absolutely. He perfected his study and reflection and really internalized the meaning of the scriptures. Not only that, but he also underwent a lot of hardship, a lot of physical austerity during these many years of study and reflection. He had very little food, only the poorest of clothing, the meagerest of food rations to live off. As for his bedding, well, he had nothing more than a sack. If you imagine two sacks kind of sewn together to make something like a sleeping bag, but if I say a sleeping bag, then you might think, oh, how cozy and nice, a sleeping bag is really quite luxurious and comfortable. Not like that, not like a modern day sleeping bag. Very rough and meager, and these two sacks sewn together served for many years as Longchenpa's bedding, his mattress and so on, and also his blankets. So this is how Longchenpa lived for all of these years, prioritizing his study and reflection. So in this way, undergoing many physical austerities and hardships, getting by just with the most meager of food and drink and so on, then Longchenpa perfected his study and reflection and became the crown ornament of all the scholars of the time. After some time, Longchenpa felt that actually, he'd done a lot of study and become very learned, yes, but surely that itself is not enough. He thought, I need to apply myself to practice, I need to actually attain accomplishment. And so he left Samye, he left this center of learning. There were other circumstances that contributed to his leaving, and the Khenpos and so on here will be familiar with these details of his life story. Like there were some Khampa monks at the monastery who Longchenpa became, in short, very fed up with. So, in short, he decided to leave and go off and focus on practice. Focus on practice and pursuing accomplishment. And so he set off. He set off to find a practice where he could devote himself to practice and meditation. And so he set off. But Longchenpa had no provisions. He had no food provisions. He had no kind of stores of clothing or bedding or anything like that. And of course, being a human with a human body, well, he needs some basic provisions, right? So he had decided where he was going. He was heading towards a sacred place where Guru Rinpoche had actually practiced in the past, and he decided he was going to settle there and practice there. And so he was on his way there, walking on foot, and on the journey he met a man. And he asked this man, where are you going? Or rather, this gentleman he met on the road asked Longchenpa, well, where are you off to? Longchenpa said, I'm off to this cave to do practice. It's such a sacred place. Guru Rinpoche himself practiced there. And then Longchenpa said to the man, well, where are you from? And it turns out this man was from that very region, that very area where the cave was. And Longchenpa said, my goodness, you're from there. You're from that very same place. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think I will be able to get alms, some basic food provisions, if I ask the locals there? Will they support me by giving me some, donating me some food, basically? And the man said, yeah, I think you'll be all right in that way. And indeed, this is how it was in the past in Tibet. The Tibetans were very good at supporting practitioners by giving them food and supporting them with donations of food and basic necessities. But then the man said, I think you'll get by if you go out and beg for alms. You should get enough to keep you going. But actually, I was recently told I need to have a certain fire puja done for myself. And Rinpoche says, I can't remember exactly which deity the fire puja was for, but if you look in Longchenpa's hagiographies, you'll find this and many other details. It might have been Kurukuli, a kind of unusual, slightly more unusual fire puja. So the man said, well, if you know how to do this fire puja and you can do it for me, then I'll invite you to my house. You can do the puja, and then in return, I'll give you some provisions to support you in your practice. Of course, Longchenpa being Longchenpa, he knew how to do this fire puja. He knew everything. So he accepted, went into the fire puja, and then the man gave him some food provisions. Just simple things, I imagine. Some tsampa, meaning roasted barley flour, some tea, some butter. And with that, then Longchenpa went off to the cave and began to practice. And again, in the course of his practice, Longchenpa underwent a lot of physical austerity. His food supplies soon ran out. His food supplies ran out before he had completed his practice and attained accomplishment. And so, not willing to give up his practice, Longchenpa stayed exactly where he was and continued practicing, living off just 21 mercury pills, or we could say 21 special tonic pills. And he sustained his body with these 21 mercury pills for many months. That's the kind of hardship he underwent for the sake of his practice. So for all these months, for this long period while he was practicing, he applied himself night and day to practice. Of course, previously, during his years of study, Longchenpa had cut through all doubts and misunderstanding and gained real confidence in the teachings. So he already had this kind of conviction. And then he put this conviction into practice by applying himself night and day in the practices of Trekchö and Tögal, the most essential pith instructions of the Great Perfection found in the pith instruction cycle, or pith instruction section, excuse me. And yet, in spite of his tremendous efforts, after quite some time, Longchenpa had still not directly realized the nature of mind. Or we could say, maybe we can put it like that, or he hadn't yet, perhaps it was because he hadn't yet met his destined guru, the guru with whom he had a karmic connection. And so one morning, Longchenpa was sitting there immersed in practice, and clouds started to gather on the horizon and move towards him. And soon he noticed that riding on these clouds was a beautiful young woman, and he soon recognized that this woman was actually Goddess Tara in person. He was filled with joy and delight to be having this vision of Goddess Tara, and as the clouds rolled towards him, Tara came ever closer, bit by bit, so that she was right before him, face to face with Longchenpa, so close that Longchenpa could actually bow down and place the crown of his head in an act of homage at Goddess Tara's feet. And excuse me, I forgot to say, as Tara was approaching Longchenpa on these clouds, she was riding a horse, a beautiful blue horse, who was wearing a turquoise-studded bridle and saddle. And so she arrived before Longchenpa. Longchenpa bowed down, placed his crown at her feet. He was so overjoyed to be seeing Goddess Tara in person, and he expressed his joy, his veneration. And then Goddess Tara said to him, Longchenpa, you have studied very well. Yes, you have become very learned in the scriptures, and you have also been practicing very well, but you've not yet met your destined guru. Your destined guru is Guru Kukuradza, the Mahasiddha Kukuradza. You need to go off and meet him. You were also his destined student. He is your destined guru. So you must go off, seek out Guru Kukuradza, and from him you will receive the most profound instructions on the great perfection, you will finally determine the nature of Rigpa and reality. You must head off and seek him out at once. When Longchenpa heard all of this, and when he heard the name of his destined guru, Guru Kokaradza, he was flooded with joy. He was filled with so much joy and exaltation, it was as if he'd attained the first bhumi of perfect joy. One note about this story. Well, I heard this story many times from my guru Kembudaza Rinpoche, and when he told the story, he would say that the horse Goddess Tara was riding was blue with, as I said, a turquoise bridle and saddle and so on. But if you look at the written hagiographies of Longchenpa, there it says that the horse Goddess Tara was riding is actually yellow. But anyway, Kembudaza Rinpoche would say that the horse was blue, and indeed Kembudaza Rinpoche was a great scholar, and no doubt his version of the story with the blue horse is from an authentic source. And also Kembudaza Rinpoche would tell this story to us so beautifully in such a moving way. So Longchenpa received this prophecy from Goddess Tara, and it really doesn't matter whether the horse was yellow or blue. All the other details of the story are the same. So Longchenpa had this vision of Goddess Tara, received this prophecy from her, and so Longchenpa immediately sought out Guru Kokaradza. He asked around, found out where he was, and he set off, and he eventually arrived at the feet of Guru Kokaradza. He met his destined guru, and was overjoyed to be reunited with him. From Guru Kokaradza, he received all of the great perfection instructions in their full, the instructions on cutting through to primordial purity, direct crossing to spontaneous presence, the practices, in short, of Trekchö and Tögal. And Longchenpa put these practices, receiving these teachings and instructions in such perfect detail and completeness, then Longchenpa gained complete certainty. He cut through any possible doubts or hesitations about these practices and these points, and arrived at complete certainty and conviction. And then he applied himself to practice. So earlier in his life, during his period of study and contemplation, Longchenpa had perfected the instruction of becoming like a sparrow without hesitation by cutting through all doubts and misunderstandings through study and reflection. But when he met his guru Kokaradza and received the great perfection teachings in such completeness, then even more so, he gained complete certainty and cut through any and all doubts and misconceptions about the profound great perfection teachings. And with this newfound certainty, he then applied himself to practice. Of course, if you want to, there's so much more to say about all of these phases of Longchenpa's life. Those more details that you can find in the written hagiographies. In short, Longchenpa then applied himself to practice. As I said, he practiced night and day without cease. So he practiced the Bardo of Samadhi and the Bardo of Dream, applying himself night and day in recognizing and sustaining the recognition of luminosity. And through this, he then gained accomplishment. He attained perfect accomplishment. And having attained accomplishment in this way, then Longchenpa took himself to sacred places like Tarpaling in Bhutan and Kangri Tökai in Tibet, and other such sacred places where he committed to writing his extraordinary mind treasures. In the form of mind treasures, he committed to writing teachings like his celebrated 7 treasuries, the Nyingtik Yapshi, and so on. Such incredibly precious sacred teachings that these days, if you just mention the name 7 treasuries, Longchenpa's 7 treasuries, everyone sort of perks up and becomes kind of overwhelmed with excitement. That's how precious these teachings are. Such incredibly potent teachings that, if you don't put them into practice, that's that. But if you do put these teachings into practice, the 7 treasuries into practice, they are teachings that really can bring you enlightenment in this body and this life. This is really the case. I personally have complete confidence in the truth of this fact. These teachings of the 7 treasuries are so incredibly precious and potent that, as Pajul Rinpoche said in his exhortation to read the 7 treasuries. He said, even if you gather together all of the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni, and not just that, all of the teachings of the Buddhas of the past, the present, and the future, and gather them all together without exception, well, they could not equal or could not be more precious than these teachings of Longchenpa that we find in the 7 treasuries. Nothing more precious and potent than this has ever appeared, nor will it ever appear. I swear on my life, Patrul Rinpoche says in his text. So how did Longchenpa reach this state? How did he attain such extraordinary realization? Well, by first of all applying himself to study and reflection, thereby cutting through doubts and misconceptions. In short, by applying and embodying the instruction of being like a sparrow without hesitation. So this study and reflection that led him to a state free of doubt, well, this is how he practiced in the Bardo of living. Then, having gained such confidence and removing himself from doubt, he applied himself to practice. Night and day he applied himself to practice. So he trained in the Bardo of dreams, training in luminosity and perceiving everything as illusion. He trained during the daytime in the Bardo of Samadhi, or the Bardo of meditation. And in this way, most specifically, he trained in the Great Perfection instructions. And through such unceasing practice night and day, then he gained realization, he gained accomplishment. He brought his accomplishment to its full, so that his realization spread as far as the expanse, as far as the reaches of space. And with that boundless realization, he was then able to compose the extraordinary treatises he composed. In a sense, it's really not appropriate actually to speak of Longchenpa and his extraordinary example, his extraordinary life in this way. A master like Longchenpa, who is really no different from masters like Garab Dorje and Manjushri Mitra, who attained masters who attained the rainbow body of great transference and so on. To speak of someone like Longchenpa experiencing the Bardo of living, the Bardo of dream and samadhi and so on, the Bardo of Dharmata and the Bardo of becoming, it's like taking a master who is, it's like taking something that is very high and lofty and dragging it down to a much lower level. It really is like that. But nevertheless, from another angle, we can look at his life story in this way and kind of see how these different bardos apply to his life story. From another angle, that's also the case. So this is how Longchenpa lived. He then, having composed these extraordinary treatises, he reached the age of 58 and he died. He passed into parinirvana at the age of 58. But Longchenpa's dying was not like a normal person dying, not like us falling sick and experiencing pain and then dying. Nothing like that. Well, how did he pass away then? Well, one day when sitting amidst people, Longchenpa took we could say like a narrow pipe or a straw and spoke into this pipe, placing it in the ear of one of his best students, a student called Chögyé Zangpo. And Longchenpa said to him, basically said to him in secret, speaking through this pipe, he said, he uttered 4 lines which usually I can remember off by heart, but today they don't come straight to mind. In short, Longchenpa said, I am not going to hang around. Now the time has come for me to leave. I will soon pass into parinirvana. I have done everything I need to do. I've accomplished the benefit of beings, and so I will soon be off. Basically, that's what he said. And his disciple was distressed, distraught to hear this, and he begged Longchenpa, please don't leave, you cannot leave us. If you pass away, if you leave this world, it will be like the sun setting. We will be engulfed in darkness. You mustn't go. So, sorry, the student's disciple's name was Chögyé Zöpa, not Chögyé Zangpo. So Chögyé Zöpa stood up, and with palms folded, he entreated Longchenpa to remain, to not pass away. But in spite of the disciples' prostrations and tears and requests, Longchenpa would not be moved. He said, no, I've made up my mind. I will be leaving soon. And so Longchenpa then, together with all of his disciples, his retinue, he traveled to Samye. At this time also I should say that Longchenpa was not ill in any way, not even under the weather with a cold. And so he set off to Samye Chimpu with his disciples and retinue, like I said, and he said things like, Probably we won't meet again. Probably we won't have much time together, what with everything being impermanent and so on. So saying this, he took all of his students off to Samye, and they all gathered on this meadow called an open plain called the Samye Meadow, a grassy plain. And there Longchenpa gave some advice and counsel to his disciples. And again, his disciples entreated him not to pass away. They pleaded with him to stay, but his mind would not be changed. Why did Longchenpa go to Samye just before dying? Why did he take his disciples there? Well, because Samye being such a sacred place, Longchenpa said that actually it is a greater blessing, so we could say greater benefit, to die in Samye than it is to attain enlightenment in other locations. Because in Samye, Samye had been graced by Guru Rinpoche and the king and 25 disciples and so on in the past. And there were still standing in the area of Samye the cremation stupas from Guru Rinpoche's time. And so before Longchenpa passed away, he instructed his disciples, cremate my body in one of these existing cremation stupas, one of these old blessed cremation stupas. Don't build a new one, just cremate my body in there. Then for a day or two, Longchenpa displayed some very kind of minor signs of illness, like being a little bit under the weather. If we say Longchenpa wasn't ill at all, well, then you might think, you Taiwanese might think, oh, well, he must have then died of a heart attack or something. Anyway, so he displayed some minor signs of illness for a day or two. And then came the time of his parinirvana. At this time, there were some students with him, not many, maybe a group of 10 or 15. Longchenpa said, okay, now the time has come. I am going to cast aside, I'm going to discard this, the burden of this old body of mine. I'm going to cast aside this burden and leave. So all of you get up and leave the room. But then the students pleaded with him, no, please, please let us stay. Longchenpa said, no, it's not good for you to be here at this time. And they said, please let us stay, please. So eventually Longchenpa said, okay, you can stay, but on a few conditions. First of all, you have to remain composed and still, no crying, no crying, no nonsense. You must sit in meditation and sustaining Rigpa. Sit in equipoise. If you can do that, then you can stay. And so he let them stay. And so Longchenpa sat up in the meditation posture, in the posture of resting the mind at ease with his hands rested on his knees. And he sat upright, looked directly into space with his eyes wide open. And with that, he passed away. His students, of course, were overwhelmed and distraught that their master had passed away. But Longchenpa, well, his passing had been as easy for him as, say, it is for us to stand up and just walk out of the room. That effortless, that easy, it was for him to pass. And without any delay, at the moment he had passed, the earth shook, rainbows appeared in the sky, a shower of flowers fell, meaning a light rainfall fell. Longchenpa died on the 18th day of the 12th Tibetan month, the 12th lunar month. This is at the very depth of winter in Tibet, and winters in Tibet are no joke. They're extremely cold. The temperature will often reach, minus 30 or 40 degrees centigrade. There's a saying in Tibet, in the 10th month, the earth cracks from the cold. In the 11th month, stones will crack from the cold. And in the 12th month, when it is the coldest, then even iron will crack from the cold. So in the very depth of this kind of intense winter, Longchenpa passed away. And yet, as soon as Longchenpa passed away, then on the frozen meadows, green fresh grass appeared. On the bare branches of the trees, then fresh blossoms appeared. And Longchenpa's body seemed completely unaffected by the cold. So these are some of the extraordinary signs that occurred at his parinirvana. And moreover, for many days after his passing, the whole all of space was filled with rainbows and orbs of light, and with different coloured light for many days after his passing. So we could say a lot more about the signs that occurred after his parinirvana. But anyway, then when his body was cremated, the cremation stupa became filled with relics, all of the different kinds of relics that are spoken of in the Tantras. Rinpoche mentioned them by name. Some white, some yellow, some blue, some red, and so on. The white relics were as white as conch, the yellow was bright yellow as gold, the blue like lapis lazuli, and so on. These perfect relics, and not just perfect, and just as explained in the Tantras, but so many of them, bags full of these perfect relics. Moreover, in the bone remains of Longchenpa's body, there appeared many Yidam deities, the form of many Yidam deities. So this is the way that Longchenpa passed away. So how does this relate to the Bardos? Well, the Bardo of dying, right? When we went through the Bardo of dying, we discussed the various dissolution stages that occur in the dying process. And so Longchenpa manifested or demonstrated these dissolution stages when he sat upright, with his eyes open, staring into the sky. He demonstrated these dissolution stages of the dying process. As I said yesterday, as we discussed yesterday, well, great lamas, realized practitioners, they don't actually go through the bardo of dying. They don't go through the bardo of dharmata, the bardo of becoming. They don't go through these bardos because they have liberated themselves before these bardos occur. They gain liberation within the basic ground itself. And so for them, these bardos don't unfold. And indeed, Longchenpa himself had already attained liberation in the ground, the basic ground, but still he seemed to demonstrate, to manifest the guise of displaying the dissolution stages, displaying the dying process. So just like he demonstrated going through the process of study and reflection in his early life, then at this point, well, he demonstrated, he manifested this guise of going through the process of dying, the bardo of dying, by manifesting some minor illness for 3 or 4 days. So we can say that's like the bardo of dying, a demonstration of the bardo of dying in Longchenpa's life. So we define the bardo of dying as the period from when one falls sick with a fatal illness until the dying process is complete, right? So we can say that Longchenpa displaying some minor illness for 2 or 3 days before his parinirvana, well, from then until his passing, we can say is the bardo of dying, as demonstrated, just as demonstrated as manifested by Longchenpa in our perspective. And after demonstrating this illness for several days, then he passed away, right, sitting upright, staring into space with his eyes wide open, maybe his mouth a little open. I remember reading this in the hagiographies. You can read about it there. And I think that's just how it's explained, how he sat upright and stared out into space. And just like that, with his eyes wide open, he passed away. He entered parinirvana. So that also was a demonstration of parinirvana, right? After passing, then he remained in the meditation posture, and a great array of extraordinary signs, rainbows, and so on appeared. Well, all of that we can say is the display and the manifestation of the bardo of dharmata. The bardo of dharmata is what we will come to next. We will discuss, so what actually happens in the bardo of dharmata? How do the peaceful deities manifest? How do the wrathful deities manifest? From where do they manifest? In what way do they manifest? All of these details we haven't come to yet, but that is what we're going to turn to next, the bardo of dharmata. So we can say that in Longchenpa's life, after his passing into parinirvana, the display of these miraculous signs was a display of the bardo of dharmata and relates to the bardo of dharmata. After the bardo of dharmata comes the bardo of becoming. Well, of course, Longchenpa, the all-knowing Longchenpa, did not go through the bardo of becoming. He's not a confused sentient being. He does not wander aimlessly without control like us. Absolutely not. But nevertheless, from one angle, we could say that Longchenpa manifested the bardo of becoming by emanating a reincarnation, by taking rebirth intentionally in the Namanakaya at Karma Lingpa, because Longchenpa did reincarnate. His incarnation was Karma Lingpa. So, of course, that process of reincarnating as Karma Lingpa is not a normal, is not similar to the ordinary process of a sentient being taking rebirth. It's not like that at all. It's a case of the enlightened mind, wisdom mind, transferring intentionally in this emanation form. Nevertheless, from the perspective of an ordinary being who themselves undergoes birth and dying and rebirth in an ordinary way, we could say that, okay, Longchenpa's manifestation, his reincarnation, is a demonstration of the Bardo of becoming. So we could say that Longchenpa viewed or generated his future mother and father as the Yidam deity, the male and female deity, and generated himself in the form of the deity. And with this pure perception or pure generation of the male and female deities, then he intentionally took rebirth and reappeared as Karma Lingpa. And this, we could say, relates to the Bardo of becoming, or is a demonstration of the Bardo of becoming. Of course, that is not actually what is meant by the Bardo of becoming. So from one perspective, I should confess, this way I'm explaining the 6 Bardos by means of Longchenpa's life is from one perspective, a case of dragging him down, dragging this sublime being down to the level of an ordinary being. From one angle, it's really not okay, actually. But nevertheless, I'm telling Longchenpa's life in this way, trying to demonstrate how the 6 Bardos apply to his life, so that it's easier for you to understand. So that from the perspective of you guys, you Taiwanese students, you can get a really clear, kind of relatable idea of, okay, right, I can see in the course of one's life, in the course of Longchenpa's life, okay, this is how the 6 Bardos go. This is what is meant by the 6 Bardos. This is how they unfold. This is how they can be trained in, right, to make it more relatable and accessible. In short, so that you can all get it, so that you can reach the point where you say, right, I get it, the 6 Bardos, I get it. But if I'm not careful, then the scholars amongst us, or scholars who hear this explanation later on, Khenpo's Lubans and so on, they might be offended and might think, what's going on here? How can we say Longchenpa, this great realized being, goes through the Bardo of becoming? Because such a master like Longchenpa does not indeed go through the Bardo of becoming. But again, why have I presented Longchenpa's life story in this way? So that you can get a sense of what is meant by the 6 Bardos, to make this subject matter more relatable, more accessible. I just want you to get the point. So that's why I have explained the 6 Bardos with reference to Longchenpa's life like this, but do understand that I'm explaining this very much from the perspective of an ordinary being, right? How an ordinary being might view Longchenpa's life. From Longchenpa's own side, from the perspective or experience of an enlightened being themselves, of course they don't go through the Bardos in this way, like an ordinary being. So from this perspective, we could say that Longchenpa emanating a Tugu, Karma Lingpa, is like his manifestation of the Bardo of becoming, right? We can relate it. We can relate his reincarnation to the Bardo of becoming, just from the perspective of an ordinary being, or just for the sake of kind of getting a handle on the 6 Bardos, okay? When we get to the Bardo of becoming, as we will later on, then we will see, okay, how does the process of rebirth actually take place? How is it that sublime beings intentionally take rebirth for the benefit of others? How is it that sublime beings reincarnate? And how is it that ordinary beings undergo rebirth? Well, an ordinary being, sentient being, they take rebirth in samsara in any of the 6, as any of the 6 types of beings in samsara, under the sway of their karma and afflictions, right? So, driven by, controlled by karma and afflictions, they take rebirth in samsara. A sublime, realized being, on the other hand, they take rebirth intentionally, with full control, by visualizing or rather seeing their future mother and father as the male and female deity in union, seeing the womb of their future rebirth as a celestial palace and pure realm. And in that way, then they reincarnate. So now, with reference to, through the lens of Longchenpa's life, we have seen how the Bardo of living, how the Bardo of living can be, let's say, practiced or used. In the Bardo of living, it said one should perfect study and reflection, right? So we saw how Longchenpa did that in his early years. Then we saw how he trained in the Bardo of dream, the Bardo of samadhi, and also how he went through, or how he displays, the Bardo of dying. And after the Bardo of dying, well, then one goes through the Bardo of dharmata and the Bardo of becoming. So we haven't actually explained the Bardo of dharmata and or Bardo of becoming yet. These two Bardos I will explain next, but I have explained them and mentioned them with reference to Longchenpa's life story. So we've now covered all 6 Bardos with reference to Longchenpa's life story, and now we'll move on to look at these last 2 Bardos in and of themselves, the Bardo of dharmata and the Bardo of becoming. Right, so we've now covered the 6 Bardos. We've looked at all 6 Bardos with reference to Longchenpa's life, or we could say through the lens of Master Longchenpa's life. And the reason I did that again was to help you understand these 6 Bardos, to make them relevant and accessible. Okay, so now let's move on to the next Bardo, the Bardo of dharmata. As our text reads, Kema, now when the Bardo of dharmata is dawning upon me, I will abandon all fear and terror, recognizing whatever appears as a natural display of awareness, I will know it to be the way this Bardo unfolds. So this is the first 4 lines of the verse pertaining to the Bardo of dharmata. And this verse, and indeed all of the root verses for the 6 Bardos that we're looking at, come from Karma Lingpa's text, right? Karma Lingpa's text, his instructions on the 6 Bardos. As mentioned yesterday, that text is quite extensive, and it contains 18 different subsections that describe the defining characteristics, the definitions, the nature, the essence, the divisions, and so on and so forth of the Bardo. We're not going through all of those details. We don't have time to do that. So what I'm trying to do as we move through these root verses, I'm trying to condense and apply all of the meaning found in that larger commentary to these 4 lines, the 4 lines or 4 or so lines we have for each Bardo. Actually, it would be much easier for me, an easier job for me, if we were just to follow the more elaborate commentary, and if I could just go through that line by line. That would make my job much easier. But that said, it probably would not be easier for you. I think that would be more difficult to understand. So to try and make this material easy and accessible for all of you guys, and also to work with the time constraint, then what I'm trying to do here is basically condense 7 or 8 days worth of teaching material into 2 teaching sessions. So this is quite challenging. This is not something easy to do. But in any case, this is what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to kind of condense all of the main points that I've understood from those larger commentaries and explain them here with reference to applying them to these 4 lines. So I say this because if I don't, I know some of you Taiwanese students can be quite skeptical. So if I don't say this, you might think, we only have 4 lines of text and yet Rinpoche is saying all of this stuff. Where is it coming from? Is there really so much to say? You might think that. So anyway, the reason I'm saying so much about just 4 lines, well, that's the reason why. Okay, so Kema, we know what that means, alas. Now when the Bardo of dharmata is dawning upon me. So this is the next Bardo that unfolds, the Bardo of dharmata, or the intrinsic nature. Well, we just discussed the Bardo of dying, right? Yesterday we discussed the Bardo of dying and how that involves the dissolution stages, outer, inner, and secret, and going through the phases of appearance, increase, and attainment. So after all of those processes are complete, we enter the Bardo of dharmata. So during the Bardo of dying, first of all we go through appearance, then increase, then attainment, and after that close, or we could say full attainment, right? And that involves the white essence and red essence attained respectively from the father and mother, descending, ascending, and in short, meeting together, causing a kind of blackout, we could say, a state in which all 7 aspects of ignorance come to a halt. And at this point then we are freed from the burden of our corporeal body, our body of flesh and blood, in outer, inner, and secret ways, always, completely free now of the burden of the body. And Rigpa, natural awareness, is then laid bare. It becomes completely evident and clear. And we have the dying person has the experience of open space, vast open space. So from that moment, that experience of vast open space at the end of the dying process until the bardo of becoming begins, that is the bardo of Dharmata. Moreover, a lot of you here in the audience, I can see, are holding copies of my book, The Great Secret of Mind, and at the end of that book, you'll find a brief explanation of the 4 bardos, so an explanation of the 4 bardos as opposed to presenting the bardos as 6. The dream and meditation bardos, well, they relate to our practice, the practice we train in during night and day, right? In any case, the 4 bardos are explained clearly and concisely in that book, so you can also read about them there, find more detail there. Well, more detail actually is being given in the teachings yesterday and today, right? Because of course, yesterday and today are devoted completely to explaining the bardos. But anyway, that is another reference, another resource for you, the last few chapters in my book. So, as I just explained, once the bardo of dying is complete, then the bardo of Dharmata begins. So what happens in the bardo of dying? Well, the white and red essences we've obtained from our father and mother, they collapse, they subside. All 80 thoughts, we could say aspects of emotion, come to a halt, and as a result, mind merges with space, or mind, you could say, opens into a vast limpid state, just like space. And in this way, Rigpa, natural awareness, is laid bare, the Rigpa of Dharmakaya, the Rigpa of Dharmakaya beyond all constructs, beyond elaboration. So with this, the bardo of Dharmata begins. So this naked awareness laid bare, this is the Dhammakaya awareness. This Dhammakaya awareness, space-like awareness, then dissolves into luminosity. Luminosity then dissolves into unity. So these are various stages of dissolution in the bardo of Dharmata. So Dhammakaya dissolves into luminosity. Luminosity here refers to primordial wisdom, jnana, and that then dissolves into unity, because primordial wisdom is not something material or substantially existent or real. Of course, these are all essentially the same aspects of the same reality, right? And the Dhammakaya, Rigpa, luminosity, natural unity, but they are described in this way as different aspects of the same nature, same reality. Like they relate to the 3 kayas, which are 3 aspects of the same reality. So the primordial purity beyond elaboration, the state of simplicity, is the Dhammakaya, luminosity is the Sambhogakaya, and the unobstructed aspect is the Nirmanakaya. These are 3 aspects of one reality. So in this way, awareness dissolves into luminosity, luminosity into natural unity, and natural unity then dissolves into, or we could say unfolds, as the manifestation of the wrathful deities, the 58 wrathful deities that arise from the crown of our head, the crown of our being, adorned with their ornaments and attire, the attire being the eightfold attire of the charnel ground and so on. These wrathful deities with 3 faces, 6 arms and so on, inconceivable in number, holding their various symbolic implements, a lot of them in hybrid form, meaning they have animal heads like the heads of birds or tigers, but their bodies are human or in human form. This great assembly, overwhelming assembly of wrathful deities manifests. They're so numerous, these deities, they fill all corners of space. They're accompanied by a tremendous sound, roar of thunder, and this is said to be like a 1,000 peals of thunder occurring at the same time. So if there's a storm in the summer or something, and there's just a few peals of thunder, that the sound is deafening, right, and also fills us with fear. So imagine 1,000 peals of thunder occurring at the same time. That would certainly overwhelm us, certainly fill us with fear. Or you could think, for instance, of the terrifying spectacle of the wars between Israel and Palestine, or you could say Russia and Ukraine. If you just watch some of this news footage of the bombs being flung from one country to the other on the TV, that itself is terrifying, right? The sound and the sight of it. So this terrifying cacophony accompanying the manifestation of the wrathful deities occurs. We also have the blinding lights and light rays. So again, this is the display that manifests when Dharmakaya dissolves into luminosity, luminosity into unity, and unity then dissolves into the kayas of the wrathful deities. The wrathful deities, of course, are a self-display. They are a natural manifestation, but the Bardo being typically will not recognize this. And they will misinterpret this display as something external, something separate from them, an external appearance, and then they will react with fear. Of course, if they don't recognize that this is actually their own self-display, a natural manifestation, of course they will be overwhelmed and frightened. Let's use an example of a tiger. This is a relatable example. So when we see a tiger, well, even the thought of a tiger kind of makes us a bit on edge, right? A tiger is a very dangerous animal, right? No doubt about that. And we are scared of tigers. But then overseas in some countries, people raise tigers as pets. They keep them from when they're young as a cub and raise them just like a dog. And then the owners of these tigers, they're not scared of their pet tiger at all, right? For them, their tiger is just like a pet dog or cat. They can play with them, spend time with them, no fear whatsoever. What's the difference then between our reaction and theirs? Well, familiarity, right? The owners of the pet tiger are familiar with the tiger, so they are not scared. But we, not being familiar, well, we are scared. Even when we see a tiger in a zoo with a fence between us and the tiger, we're still kind of nervous, right? Or we could use the example of the huge Tibetan dogs, the Tibetan mastiffs we have in Tibet. They're, as big as a bear. Honestly, I think if you just lay your eyes upon one of these dogs, you would become nervous. But the owners of these dogs, they're not scared of them at all, are they? They're familiar with them. They know these dogs, so they're not scared. They go over to them, they give them their food, their noodle soup. Maybe sometimes they even scold them a bit, what have you. So the same goes when this display of the peaceful and wrathful deities occurs in the Bardo of Dharmata. Bardo beings who have gained familiarity with the peaceful and wrathful deities through practice, through exposure. Maybe they've heard and studied about the Bardo and the peaceful and wrathful deities. They've seen tankas, illustrations. Maybe they've seen a sacred dance enacting the peaceful and wrathful deities. Because of that familiarity gained, therefore, when this display unfolds, they recognize it. They're familiar, they recognize it, and so they don't respond with fear. This goes to show the enormous benefit of watching the sacred dances that enact, any of the sublime manifestations, that especially the peaceful and wrathful deities. And here you have many opportunities to see such dances, right? Like the dances that enact the 8 manifestations of Guru Rinpoche and so on. But especially the dances of the peaceful and wrathful deities, you should make use of those opportunities, go and watch those dances, not as a performance, but actually as a profound instruction. So now let's look at the next few lines. So we've covered the first line, now when the Bardo of Dharmata is dawning upon me. The next line reads, I will abandon all fear and terror, recognizing whatever appears as the natural display of awareness. So I will abandon all fear and terror. Well, fear and terror towards what? Towards this display of the peaceful and wrathful deities. How do we abandon all of that fear and terror? Well, by recognizing that this display is a self-display, that it is a natural manifestation. As the third line reads, recognizing whatever appears. All of these appearances of the peaceful and wrathful deities, these lights and sounds and so on, recognizing them to be the natural display of one's own awareness. So in this way, abandoning fear and terror, I will know it to be the way this Bardo unfolds. I'll recognize this display for what it is. So again, why do we feel fear at this moment? Where does the fear and terror come from? Well, as we explained, during the Bardo of dying, we go through these phases of appearance, then increase, then attainment. When these 3 phases of appearance, increase, and attainment are complete, then awareness is laid bare. Awareness then dissolves into natural unity, and from natural unity, then the wrathful deities manifest. So first of all, we have this sky-like experience, this experience of naked awareness that is just like open, limpid space. That then dissolves into unity, and from there, the display of the wrathful deities manifests, right? And when these deities manifest, when this display appears, we are completely overwhelmed by it. Because we fail to recognize it as self-display, then we are overwhelmed by this awesome display. So overwhelmed and terrified that we faint. We literally pass out. And then after passing out, we come to, we revive. There are different ways of fainting, it seems. Not every being will faint in the same way or for the same duration. Some will faint just for a second, some for longer. Some will faint just for the period of finger snap, literally a split second, and then they'll revive. So it's different for different Bardo beings. It's different for different individuals, and you should know this about all the aspects of the Bardos. So likewise too, when it comes to the process of taking rebirth, well, some beings move very fast through the Bardo after death and take rebirth very quickly. Others take much longer, and so on. And we find the same variation. We find the same variation here when beings faint out of fear of this awesome display of the wrathful deities. So at this point, and also later on when it comes to taking rebirth and so on, how long these processes take, how clearly the Bardo being experiences them, how much they recognize or not, all of that depends on how developed they are, their virtue, their non-virtue, their disposition, and so on and so forth. In any case, let's go back to the display. This awesome display of wrathful deities manifests. Well, we react with fear, so much fear that we faint, and then after fainting we revive. Once we revive and regain consciousness, well then what happens? Well then the peaceful deities manifest. The 42 peaceful deities manifest as vividly and clearly as a scene playing out on a film screen before us. These peaceful deities are the nature of 5 colored lights, so they are the nature of rainbow light, made up of white, red, yellow, blue and green light rays, just as described in the various liturgies for the practice of the peaceful wrathful deities, which begin, well, Rinpoche quoted one specific line, to paraphrase, it says, my nature manifests now in this display of peaceful and wrathful deities. So this is to say that all of these manifestations of the peaceful and wrathful deities are self-display, right? And they are the nature of rainbow light. They're not concrete, solid, made up of material substance, atoms and so on. These forms of the deities are not corporeal forms of flesh and blood. They're all the nature of light. They are all self-display. When a practitioner is faced with this manifestation of the peaceful deities, well, they will respond with awe and delight, wonder and amazement if they're a practitioner, and they'll be able to recognize that this display is a self-display. And if they can really recognize this at this point, then through the power of that recognition, recognizing that this display is the manifestation of the ground, manifestation of their own nature, then they will apply effectively this instruction of the child and mother reuniting, right? It's said that in the Bardo of Dharmata one should apply the instruction of a child reuniting with its mother. What do we mean by this? Well, for instance, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old child, they might be in a big crowd with loads of people around, but as soon as they see their mother, without any doubt, they recognize their mother, run over to her and jump onto her lap. Just like that, if the practitioner can decisively recognize that this is a self-display, this is the manifestation of the ground, and they can recognize Rigpa within that, or they can recognize that as the display of Rigpa, then they'll be liberated into the basic ground, and liberated from the Bardo at that point. Where does all this display arise from? Well, it arises from the heart center. The peaceful deities are said to abide in the heart center, and the wrathful deities, they are said to abide in our skull. Self-existing Rigpa, self-arisen Rigpa, or awareness, abides in our heart center, and it is the glow or the natural radiance of this Rigpa present in our hearts that then manifests as the peaceful deities. So it's actually a bit complicated when you first learn about how the peaceful and wrathful deities manifest, how one manifestation occurs, then it dissolves, then another manifestation occurs, that dissolves, and so on. There's this kind of sequence of manifestations and dissolution and so on. It can be a bit complicated when you first hear about it, if you're not familiar. So I'm trying and will try to explain this as clearly as possible. But know that all of these details are incredibly profound points, actually. So back to the process, we have this manifestation of the peaceful deities together with a great display of bindus and spheres. This display, once it's unfolded, then it dissolves back. It dissolves back into oneself, into self-arisen awareness, which abides in one's heart center. I should mention that there are slightly different explanations of this sequence of manifestation, depending on found in the various scriptures. So, for instance, in the Yeshe Lama, we find a slightly different explanation to what's presented here in the instructions on the 6 Bardos, and so on. Well, how is it explained in Yeshe Lama? In Yeshe Lama, it's explained that, well, the example of a stalk of wheat is used. When you have a stalk of wheat, well, you have one stalk, one stem, right? And then on top of that, you have a head of wheat, which has, say, 4 or 5 branches. So let's say 4 branches. Excuse me, that might not be the correct word, but I hope you know what I mean. Kind of the equivalent of petals of a flower. We have these 4 branches of the head of wheat, right? White, red, yellow, and blue, not green at this point. So just 4, and these 4 are the 4 primordial wisdoms. And this example of a single stalk with 4-fold head of wheat at the top is analogous to the manifestation of the combined 4 primordial wisdoms that manifest at this point, as explained in the Yeshe Lama. This is also called the path, the innermost secret path of Vajrasattva, this manifestation. And in Yeshe Lama, it's explained that so just like this head of wheat has various parts to it, likewise we have a manifestation of 5 different clusters of bindus. So a white cluster, which is the nature of Vajrasattva, Lord Vajrasattva and all of the deities of his family. Then we have red cluster, which is the nature of Buddha Amitayus and his mandala deities. Yellow, which is the nature of Ratnasambhava. Blue, the nature of Verochana, and so on. So all the different Buddha families surrounded by countless mandala deities, male and female bodhisattvas, the 6 munis, and so on. In short, the entire array, boundless array of the peaceful and wrathful deities. For a good, well-trained practitioner, then all of this will appear clearly and vividly, and they'll register it all clearly and vividly. For those of us without that kind of familiarity, well, we will only register this display very roughly or vaguely, maybe only very briefly. How is this display explained here in the instructions on the 6 Bardos and other texts? Well, it's explained rather that these various clusters of bindus appear tiered, so one on top of the other. First of all, the cluster of white bindus, on top of that yellow, on top of that red, on top of that blue, and inside each then all of the respective deities. In short, this manifestation, boundless manifestation of the peaceful and wrathful deities and these bindus and spheres occurs at this point. And if one is trained in waking life, or if one is trained during one's life in the great perfection, if one has attained stability in the generation and completion stages, then when witnessing this manifestation, we will recognize it for what it is. We'll recognize that this is a manifestation of the ground. These are appearances arisen from the ground, from my basic nature. Because, after all of these appearances arise from one's own heart, right? They have all arisen from one's own basic awareness, naturally present awareness. As I said, first of all, from the heart, the peaceful deities manifest as the glow of natural awareness. This then reflects up to the skull, and the manifestation of the wrathful deities occurs. So first the 42 peaceful deities, and then the 58 wrathful deities. It's, for example, we could say, like what happens when light strikes a crystal. You have a small crystal, and you might have just one or a few rays of light, a few gentle rays of light strike the crystal. And this crystal then reflects those light rays into a great mass of bright rainbow-colored lights, right? So actually the kind of incoming lights are quite small and gentle, but the crystal then reflects them into this great display of rainbow lights. Well, it's similar to that then. From the heart, from natural awareness present in the heart, the peaceful deities manifest, and that manifestation then, we could say, reflects up to or stimulates the wrathful deities in the skull, which then manifest in even a more awesome and more awesome way, filling, as we said before, all corners of space, filling the whole reaches of, filling the whole of space. And this is again one very good reason for us to watch the sacred dances that enact the peaceful and wrathful deities, or cham as it's called in Tibetan. So these are not, we should not go to watch these just as a performance or some kind of play, like going to watch a movie, but actually going to watch them with really paying attention and care, seeing them as instructions. These dances are sacred dances. They stem from the pure visions of various realized masters, and the reason for watching them is to familiarize ourselves with those appearances, because the peaceful and wrathful deities is exactly what we are going to be faced with, what we are going to see later on in the Bardo of Dharmata. So here, those of you in Taiwan are so lucky, you have many opportunities to see such sacred dances. Lamas come here with groups of even 50 or 60 monks who then are trained to perform these dances, so you have the opportunity to see them. If not here, then you can see them certainly in places like India and Nepal. The point is that we need to recognize this display as self-display, as a natural manifestation. We need to recognize that this is not some external display. These deities are not something separate from me. They are my own nature. This is a display of my own nature. So as the text explained, this is a manifestation of the combined primordial wisdoms. So to reiterate once more, first of all, as explained here, the wrathful deities manifest, they then dissolve, then the peaceful deities manifest, they then dissolve. And what manifests now, after the peaceful and wrathful and peaceful deities have manifested and dissolved, what manifests next is the pure realms of the peaceful and wrathful deities. And so at this point it seems not their kayas, not their forms, but their realms, accompanied by a great display of lights. And below the manifestation of these pure realms appear the realms of the six types of beings in samsara. So the god realm, demigod realm, human, animal, hungry ghost, and hell realms. So this is kind of the beginning of the Bardo of becoming, we're approaching the Bardo of becoming now, but we're still very much in the Bardo of Dharmata. So in this context, the texts on the Bardo speak of 4 or 5 days of meditation that occur in the Bardo. What's meant by a day of meditation, though, in this context? Well, Longtempa explains that day here doesn't refer to a period of 24 hours as we kind of usually know it, but rather a period of practice, a duration of practice, which will vary from person to person, depending on their level of practice. In Tibet, we talk about 4 days, observing 4 days after death, which actually is observed as 3.5 days. So after the moment of dying, then especially if someone is a lama or a practitioner, then it's said to be very important not to move their body, not to disturb their body, or not to disturb them in any way, because in these 3.5 days, or 4 days as they're described, that deceased person is going through this various unfolding stages of the Bardo of Dharmata and so on. So they mustn't be disturbed. But as I said, the duration of these processes will depend, can vary significantly from being to being. So when we speak, say, of 49 days, the 49 days of the intermediate state after death, well, that is very much a generalization. It's important to understand that. There are some beings who will take rebirth after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, so they will not stay in the Bardo for 49 days. There are some who will stay longer than 3 weeks, all the way up to, for a full 7 weeks, making 49 days. And there are some who will pass straight through the intermediate state after death, beings who have accumulated very terrible negative karma, or people, for instance, who have taken their own lives. It's actually a grave negative karma to take your own life. It's said to be worse karma to take your own life than it is to murder 500 people. Why? Because when you take your own life, you are killing the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities. I'm not saying this is taught in the Rangshar Tantra, the self-arisen Tantra. So taking your own life is a serious negative karma. Similarly, beings who have performed one of the 5 karmic acts of immediate retribution, like killing one's father, one's mother, an arhat, causing a schism in the Buddhist Sangha, and drawing blood from the Buddha's body with ill intent. Anyone who's performed these or other such grave acts will most likely go straight to hell the very moment after they've stopped breathing, because of the force of their negative deeds. On the very other end of the spectrum, we have beings like the great Yogi Milarepa, Longchenpa, and so on. These accomplished beings who, because of the strength of their realization, will not go through the bardo of dharmata the moment they the moment their body ceases stops living. They will that very moment be liberated and move on to a pure realm. So then you might say, oh, but hey, Rinpoche, you spoke about Longchenpa's life and how he went through all 6 bardos. Well, I know I did, but that was just from the perspective of, or the lens of a sort of more ordinary perspective, right? And as I explained, I spoke about Longchenpa's life story. I presented his life story in that way to help everyone understand the 6 bardos and to kind of get a handle on this material. That is very much presented from an ordinary perspective. Similarly, when we talk about Buddha Shakyamuni's life, we can say, oh, he when he was this and that age, then he fell ill due to this and this circumstance, and then he went here, and then he lay down in the sleeping lion's posture, and then he passed away. Well, yes, from an ordinary being's perspective, we can speak about Buddha's parinirvana like that. But from Buddha Shakyamuni's own perspective, of course, it didn't happen like that, right? None of that occurred. So important to make that distinction as well, how we might explain things from an ordinary perspective, a worldly person's perspective, and then from the realized being's perspective. So let's go back to the process, the unfolding of the bardo of dharmata. So we have this manifestation of the wrathful deities, which then dissolves, and then the manifestation of the peaceful deities, which then dissolves. And then, so we have this manifestation of the 4 combined primordial wisdoms, which then dissolves. And what happens after that? Well, the Pure Lands manifest. So at this point, the forms of the deities, the kayas, have dissolved. Now their pure realms, peaceful and wrathful, manifest, and below them the realms of the 6 types of samsaric beings, hell beings, hungry ghosts, and so on. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that's how it's commonly translated, but the Liberation Upon Hearing, we find detailed instructions and explanations of this manifestation of light rays at this point. It explains, so lights of the 5 colors will appear. You have a very bright white light, and then a more murky kind of grayish light. You have bright red light, and then a dark red, muted red light, and same for blue, green, yellow, and so on. And the bardo being is instructed to look not at the murky grey light, for instance, but to look straight at the bright white light. Don't get attracted to the muted dark red light, but look straight at the bright white red light, and so on. So what's all that about? Well, because when this display manifests, the display of the pure realms of peaceful and wrathful deities are so bright, so intense, so brilliant, that they are overwhelming. They're actually difficult to bear, difficult to look at. And so naturally beings are drawn to the more muted manifestation, which are actually the manifestation of the impure realms of samsara, right? The 6 abodes of the 6 types of samsaric beings. And so naturally the being is drawn to those muted, more dull displays. They're easier to accommodate, right? Easier to look at. And so the instructions are, do not be drawn to those dull, muted lights, but focus on the bright, brilliant lights, which are the manifestation of the peaceful and wrathful realms. Another point to mention here is that the Bardo being will experience a degree of clairvoyance at this time. That means that if there are lamas praying for them, they'll be able to see what kind of motivation those lamas have. So if a lama or practitioner is doing prayers for the deceased with a very positive motivation, and if they have some degree of accomplishment, well, they'll really be able to bring benefit to that being. But equally, if the lamas are practicing with insincere motivations, maybe they're just thinking about how much money they're going to be given as an offering, and so on and so forth, well, the Bardo being will see all of that. It'll be crystal clear to them, and they could respond with real angst, sadness. They could feel hurt, they could feel angry, and as a result of that, they could end up going in a very bad direction and even taking rebirth as a spirit or something. There are many accounts of that happening. Similarly, the Bardo being with their clairvoyance will see what their family is doing. So if the family are fighting over inheritance, wealth, property, and so on, well, that Bardo being will be very disturbed to see all of that, and they can respond, they might react with sadness or anger, or what have you, and again, they can end up moving in a very negative direction, taking a negative rebirth as a result. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. And as I said, beings, how long a being will stay in the Bardo depends very much on the karma they've accumulated, their disposition, and so on, and those with very grave negative karma or those who've committed suicide are likely to pass straight through the Bardo to their next rebirth, to the lower realms. But equally, there are some with negative karma who will end up staying in the Bardo for more than 49 days. We could say in a kind of purgatory. There are accounts of beings who get stuck in the Bardo, become spirits, ghosts in the Bardo. They get stuck there for a year or more. These are very, very rare cases, but they do occur. Most beings will pass through the Bardo within 49 days. Hence, we have that generalization, that general figure of 49 days. So these are a few more points we need to be aware of, that in the Bardo of Dharmata, the Bardo being will enjoy some clairvoyance and miraculous powers. But you also need to understand that this is not the result of spiritual practice or meditation. This clairvoyance is just, you could say, a kind of karmic ripening, or it is just the quality of this state. It's just the quality of being a Bardo being in the Bardo of Dharmata at this point. So it's not the result of some accomplishment. It's not like certain types of clairvoyance and powers which arise through natural awareness. It's more a karmic ripening. For instance, beings who are born in the God realm, well, as a kind of karmic aspect of that rebirth, they enjoy certain types of clairvoyance, right? Likewise, beings who are born as different types of animals, like, well, dogs, they have an extraordinary power of smell, right? They can smell like a deer or something on the very far side of the valley. A bird's eyes are more powerful than a microscope. They can see many kilometers, right? So these powers, these abilities are aspects of karmic ripening. So similarly in the Bardo being enjoys some clairvoyance, but that is a quality, you could say a karmic quality of being in the Bardo. So much more to say about the Bardo of Dharmata, but we are short on time. These are some of the most important points we need to understand and keep in mind about the Bardo of Dharmata. And we should know that if we have practiced well and developed a good, stable practice during our life, whether it be the practice of the Great Perfection, the Great Seal, the Generation and Completion stages, or maybe we've chanted the Vajraguru mantra or the Mani mantra and so on, with steadfast faith and so on. In short, if we have practiced well, then we will be able to easily recognize our nature when going through the Bardo of Dharmata. We'll be able to supplicate, and through supplication recognize and find our way through the Bardo of Dharmata as a result of our practice. And as a result of that, we will gain recognition and be able to free ourselves in the Bardo. So why is this possibility there? Well, because as Guru Rinpoche said, in the Bardo of Dharmata, since we are completely free of the corporeal body, and all 80 thought states have come to a halt, Rigpa lays itself bare. It becomes so incredibly clearly manifest. And because of that, it gives us an opportunity to recognize a much better chance to recognize Rigpa. So if at this moment, through the strength of the practice we've cultivated, we can recognize Rigpa in the Bardo of Dharmata, we can recognize our basic nature, well then we'll very swiftly be able to free ourselves to attain enlightenment. Let's use the example of a room that might have been dark for 100 years. But if you then switch the light on, well, that 100 years worth of darkness is going to be dispelled in a single moment, right? The darkness is gone with the flick of a switch. It's the same with recognition. If we can recognize our true nature, recognize the manifestation, recognize these Bardo manifestations as manifestations of the ground, meaning manifestations of our own nature, and gain stability in that recognition, well then right there and there we will attain enlightenment. So 2 more lines for this verse on the Bardo of Dharmata. Now that I've reached this momentous crucial point, I will not fear these natural manifestations, the peaceful and wrathful deities. So now that I've reached this momentous crucial point, well, this is referring to the point of the Bardo of Dharmata. There is no more momentous, vital and significant moment than this. A moment of potential significance and also a moment of potential fear and intensity, right? As this awesome display of the peaceful and wrathful deities unfolds before us. What we must do at this momentous crucial point is not fear these natural manifestations. Natural manifestations is an alternative translation for self-display. So by recognizing that all of these manifestations of the peaceful and wrathful deities are none other than a display of my own nature, by recognizing that they are not some external reality, they're not something that exists and are established outside of me, but rather they are just the apparition of my own nature. So if we can muster this kind of confidence, this kind of certainty, a certainty that stems from the practice of Trekchö and Tögal, then we will not react with fear. We will not fear these natural manifestations. We'll recognize them for what they are. This term, well, in Tibetan, the term is rangnang, which we can translate as self-display or natural manifestation. This is an incredibly profound term. It indicates to us that everything that appears is none other than the creative display or the energy of Rigpa, of natural awareness, the peaceful and wrathful deities, samsara, nirvana, pleasure and pain, whatever we experience, whatever we can possibly experience, it's all self-display. It's all the energy of natural awareness. If we can understand this and recognize this, well then we will be able to recognize the great perfection, the meaning of the great perfection. All right, we'll pause here, take a break, and then we'll resume. We'll resume the teaching after a short break.